When I sat down to record this episode, I went back and I listened to the very first one, Season 1, Episode 1, Being Human in the Age of AI. I wanted to hear whether my thesis still held. My thesis was simple. The reason that roughly 70% of transformations fail is not the technology and it's not the strategy. It is the human factor. It is the psychology of the people who have to live with the change while they keep the organization running. 18 episodes in the season 2, and I'm more convinced of that than when I first started. But I've also learned something that I didn't expect. Understanding the human factor isn't the same as knowing what to do about it. Season 1 was about seeing the problem clearly. Season 2 was about what you actually do once you can see it. And today, in the season finale, I want to trace the whole arc, name what emerged, and tell you where season 3 is going. I'm Kevin Novak, CEO of 2040 Digital, professor at the University of Maryland, and author of the book, The Truth About Transformation, Leading in the Age of AI, Uncertainty, and Human Complexity, along with the Ideas and Innovations weekly newsletter. Welcome to the Human Factor Podcast, the show that explores the intersection of humanity, technology, and transformation, along with the psychology behind transformation success. This is the season 2 finale, 18 episodes, and across them, I was joined by a remarkable group of people who do this work in the field every day. Elizabeth Stewart, James Elliott, Ryan Vett, Erin Fuller, Mike Peroni, Eric Hoplin, and to close the season, Deborah Patton, Justin Thorp, and Tom Serena. If season 1 moved from the question to the diagnosis, season 2 moved from diagnosis to intervention, from naming the human factor to working with it daily. Let me walk you back through the season because, well, the order that we explored these ideas, it wasn't an accident. And because the guests, well, they shaped it as much as the research did. We opened season 2 inside the individual because that's where change is actually felt. In episode 14, The Identity Crisis of Expertise, we looked at what happens when what you know becomes what holds you back. When years of mastery fuse with a person's sense of self, well, any change that threatens the expertise threatens the person. That's why your most capable people are often your most resistant. They have the most identity invested in the old way. In episode 15, The Contagion Effect, Elizabeth Stewart joined me to follow how emotions move through an organization during change and transformation. Anxiety and trust are both contagious. They spread through teams faster than any memo, and while leaders are the most contagious carriers of them all, whether they intend to be or not. And in episode 17, The Algorithmic Mirror, we turn to AI not as a tool, but as a reflection. What artificial intelligence reveals about how we actually think, decide, and deny. The machine, it holds a mirror up to our own reasoning, and a great deal of what it shows us is very uncomfortable. From the individual, we move to the structures that surround the individual. That quiet architecture that shapes behavior long before anyone makes a decision. In episode 16, The Middle Management Trap, we looked at why the people we count on the most to carry change, our middle managers, are so often set up to fail. They're squeezed between a strategy that they didn't write and a team that looks to them to absorb every shock. In episode 18, The Organizational Immune System, James Elliott, the Chief Executive Officer of the James Elliott and Company, Inc., joined me to examine how a culture attacks what it does not recognize. The same mechanisms that protect an organization from genuine threats also attack the new and the unfamiliar, including the change the organization says it wants. In episode 19, Structural Silence, we named the systems that train people not to speak. Silence in organizations is rarely about a lack of courage. It's usually a rational response to what the structures reward and what it punishes. And in episode 20, The Broken Contract, we explore the unwritten promises that transformation violates. The psychological contract isn't in any handbook, but it's felt more deeply than the formal one. And breaking it, well, it produces not resistance, but a sense of betrayal. The middle of the season widened the lens from the single organization to the patterns that repeat across many. In episode 21, When Generations Collide, Ryan Vett, a generational futurist and the author of Cracking the Millennial Code, joined me to look at the generational fault lines of transformation. Not the lazy stereotypes, but the real differences in what people who enter the workforce in different decades expect from the work and from each other. In episode 22, The Diagnostic Map, I went solo and I made it practical. An 8-question diagnostic that helps a leader locate where a transformation is actually failing at the human level instead of guessing. In episode 23, The Pattern Spotter, I was joined by Erin Fuller, the Chief Strategy Officer at MCI, who works across more than 100 associations at once. We talked about what you start seeing from that vantage point, the same human behaviors, the same forms of resistance, repeating across very different institutions. In episode 24, The Growth Trap, Mike Peroni, a revenue and go-to-market leader, joined me to examine what scaling reveals about the human side of change and transformation. What breaks when an organization grows is rarely the strategy. It's the trust, the communication, and the shared understanding that didn't scale with the headcount. And in episode 25, The Collective Transformation Problem, Eric Hoplin, the president and chief executive officer of the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, joined me to look at what happens when an entire industry has to change at once. In his case, well, more than 30,000 interdependent companies where one link modernizing ahead of the other doesn't speed the system up. It creates new friction. As the season went on, the conversations kept pulling towards this exact moment that we're all living through. In episode 26, The Readiness Illusion, we took on the AI agent era directly. The agent era is real, but the loudest claims about it are running well ahead of the evidence and confusing what is actually possible with what an organization is actually ready for. In episode 27, Transformation Theater, we named something I think every leader has felt. Organizations performing the rituals of change without actually producing change. The form is present, the substance isn't. We do the meetings, the dashboards, the steering committees, and we call the motion progress. And in episode 28, The Trust Paradox, Elizabeth Stewart returned for a conversation about the small but incredibly important category of institutions that are built deliberately to stay the same. Standards bodies, credentialing organizations, professional associations, the organizations whose whole authority rests on continuity, where every signal of change risks being read as instability by the very people who depend on them. It's a paradox that Elizabeth has spent more than 30 years navigating from the inside. And then to close the season before this finale, 2 conversations with people who are actually doing the work. In episode 29, Beyond Demographics, I sat down with Deborah Patton and Justin Thorp. We took up a tension that most organizations never resolve: data without craft and craft without data. You can segment an audience into dozens of behavioral cohorts and still land with the emotional weight of a form letter. And you can write something genuinely moving and send it to entirely the wrong people at entirely the wrong moment. The episode is about what happens when an organization finally integrates both craft and data, because communication is simply the human factor in another form. The message that doesn't account for the person doesn't land. In an episode 30, Tom Serena, who has led the American Gastroenterological Association since the 1990s, joined me for what I called the long game. It was a perfect ending to the season. Tom gave the season its plainest definition of the work. The denominator of change, he said, is pace and patience. You rarely control the pace, and if you try, you will spend the foundation before the change is ever visible. He told the story of standing up a venture fund inside a medical association, an idea that failed the first time he brought it to the board. He read that as resistance. Only later did he see it differently. The board was not refusing the idea. He had simply moved faster than they could absorb. His advice to any new leader is the line I keep returning to: don't come in to transform. Come in to find out what needs to be transformed. And underneath all of it, his governance lesson: you can't change what an organization does until you change how it decides. If you take one image from the end of this season, let it be Tom's. The institutions that endure are built mostly out of the work that no one sees while it's happening. When I look back across all 18 episodes, a few things come into focus that I didn't fully see while we were in the middle of them. The first is that season one's lessons held and went deeper than I expected. In season one, we learned that resistance is information, not obstruction, that what you measure determines what you manage, and that identity is the deepest layer of resistance. Everything in season two sat on top of those three: the middle management trap, the broken contract, the identity crisis of expertise. They are all underneath about identity and about the gap between what people say and what they do. The second is that structure usually beats intention. We spent a lot of this season on the architecture around people, the silence the system trains, the immune response the culture mounts, the contract that no one wrote down. A leader can have all the best intentions in the world and still be defeated by a structure that quietly rewards the opposite. If you want different behavior, you often have to change the structure before you change the people. And the third is the one I keep coming back to after the conversations with the practitioners this season. With Erin Fuller, who sees it across 100 associations, with Eric Hoplin, who is trying to move an entire industry, and with Tom Serena, who has stayed in one seat for 3 decades. Transformation is not an event. It's a practice. It's patience. Repeat it. The organizations that actually change aren't the ones with the boldest launch. They are the ones willing to do the quiet, unglamorous, repeated work long after the announcement, when no one is clapping. So where does that leave season three? Season one was about understanding the human factor. Season two was about applying it. Season three, well, the way I'm thinking about it right now, is about practice and what it actually takes to build the human factor into how an organization works, not as a one-time intervention, but as a durable capability. I want to stay flexible about the exact episodes. First, and this is where I'm leaning the hardest, the dynamic between artificial intelligence and human beings, not as a technology topic, but as the clearest case study of the human factor that we've ever had, and one that is unfolding in real time right now in front of every one of us. The Age and Era deserves far more than the 2 episodes I gave it in the algorithmic mirror and the readiness illusion. And those questions only get sharper as agents move from demonstrations into organizational workflows. The through line I keep returning to is this: what happens to identity, to trust, and to the psychological contract when the new colleague is not a person? And when work that used to define people starts to be done by software? Everything this show has been about: resistance, identity threat, readiness, the gap between what people say and what they do is playing out in the AI transition at full scale and across the entirety of society. Season 3 is where I want to follow it as it happens. Second, I want more of the feel and fewer episodes of just me. It gets kind of weird. The conversations this season with Elizabeth Stewart, Ryan Vett, James Elliott, Erin Fuller, Mike Peroni, Eric Hoplin, and with Deborah, Patton, Justin Thorp, and Tom Serena were some of the most useful of the year because they put research next to lived experience and let the two argue. Season 3 will lean further into that format. The research framing meets the practitioner who has actually paid the price of learning the lesson. Third, I want to close the loop on measurement. We have said all along, what you measure determines what you manage. So season 3 will get concrete about measuring the human factor itself: readiness, trust, and the gap between stated and revealed commitment. The things that most organizations still don't measure because, well, they're hard, even though they are exactly the things that decide whether transformation and change succeeds or fails. And if I'm honest about where I think the most important work is, it is this: the pace problem. Tom Serena named it for me at the end of this season. The denominator of change, he said, is pace and patience, and you rarely control the pace. I haven't stopped thinking about that since. We are asking people to absorb more change faster than at any point in the history of organized work, and we are doing it with the same human nervous system we have had always. I don't think the answer is to slow everything down because the world isn't going to slow down. I think the answer is learning to sequence change to a pace that people can actually sustain. That's the question I want to live inside of most next season. So season 3 starts in late August or September. Between now and then, the work doesn't stop. Before we close, I want to thank you. Whether you found this show at episode 1 or somewhere in the middle of season 2, you chose to spend your time thinking hard about why change succeeds or fails, and about your own behavior and the behavior of the people around you. That's not a small thing. The notes I get from listeners telling me a framework helped you see a problem differently, or that you sent an episode to your team and it started a real conversation, well, honestly, those matter more than any download numbers ever will. We're going to go on a short break between seasons. But again, the work continues. The Ideas and Innovations newsletter goes out every Thursday. If you're not subscribed, you can find it at 2040digital.com or on Substack. I share practical frameworks and research on why change succeeds or fails. And if you want a baseline of your own organization, the Human Factor Method and the Transformation Readiness Assessment are both available at transformationassessment.com. They measure not just whether your people support change, but whether they are psychologically prepared for what real change demands of them. Subscribe to the Human Factor Podcast wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. And please leave a rating and a comment. Share this finale with a leader who has spent this year drowning in change and wondering whether any of it is actually working. Sometimes the most useful thing that you can give someone is the language for what they are already living through. Until next time, remember, the 70% failure rate was never inevitable. It's the result of overlooking what matters most. Keep questioning the assumption that transformation is about the technology. Keep advocating for the human factor. This is the Human Factor Podcast. I'm Kevin Novak. Thank you for an extraordinary second season, and thanks for watching or listening.